before we dive into the submittal template, first wanted to just note that there were a few changes to this template in this release this summer, but not truly significant ones. We removed 2 fields that were flag fields for whether or not the location was capped or dredged. We found that these were not really being commonly used and often misused, so we did end up removing those. Also, we did rename one field from marine elevation reference to sediment elevation reference because it was only applicable for those people submitting sediment data, and it applies to both freshwater and saltwater sediment sites. So updated that name. One other change that came out of the release was that now when you're submitting elevation data for your locations, we only accept the elevation value with respect to the NAVD88 elevation datum. We used to offer multiple choices, but now we're trying to standardize elevations because they're being used automatically to populate things like water level elevations for well data by the system, and we want to make sure that everything going in is a true elevation value and not a relative one, which we used to accept, or people would try to submit for. Another thing I think it's probably important to discuss before we get into how to enter the data in is defining what a location is to EIM. And a common point of confusion. Locations in EIM are the description of an XY coordinate on the surface of the Earth. And in EIM, we create them for wherever monitoring data was collected. And it could be a measurement or a sample or whether observation was just made. But it is just the representation of that XY position. For things, for sampling sites that have a depth associated with them, we'll actually be submitting that depth information at the result level to associate the point data to a depth. And because depths are often variable, or you're sampling from multiple depths, we store that information at the result level. So please don't create a new station for each depth at which you're sampling. Also, locations don't need to be added over time. We only need to submit one location, and any study can actually submit to a location. So if you're doing multiple projects and sampling at the same site, please just enter that location in once, and you can refer to that site when you submit your results. And you might remember that Mickey Mouse looking diagram that was shown earlier today. The locations in EIM are tied to your results via a location ID. And that's actually the first field in this loading template, is establishing a location ID for the XY coordinates you're about to describe. And it's an important field. You have 15 characters to uniquely describe your site. And this has to be a unique ID within the EIM database. So prior to submitting a location through your template, we strongly urge you to check the location ID values that you're about to submit into this template and make sure they don't already exist for another site. In this example here on the spreadsheet, COB could be City of Bellingham, City of Bremerton. Be sure that it doesn't exist for multiple locations. You could be using similar naming conventions accidentally.
And Adam, what's the best way to search and verify that it doesn't already exist?
The best way is using the EIM search application online. And I'll give you a little preview of some of the location tools that we have built in. You can search directly by location ID in that application. And you can also use our map search application to look at your sampling site's coordinate to make sure that there isn't something nearby that represents your exact station. But yeah, I'll give you a little preview of those tips after we get through the location template. And then we'll also be discussing search in more detail this afternoon. All right, let's get down to the really fun part of going field by field through this wonderful template. The first field, as I mentioned, is location ID. And this is your 15-character alphanumeric field where you're uniquely identifying your site. If you select something that is not very unique, or we find that it exists already, your data coordinator finds it exists already, we'll probably call you and or email you and suggest that you create a new location ID. There isn't a whole lot of room to uniquely name it, so this next field is the location name field. This is a 40-character field where you can provide a more detailed name for this location ID. And this is going to be stored for this location ID within the EIM database. And again, other people may be using this site, so please try not to include things that are too unique to your study in this name. That's a suggestion. The next field is location setting. And this field is a general characterization of what is that land surface type is for your coordinate point. Right now we have some very specific values, and some of them could be, you could use many of the options to represent the same site. So please just use the one that best represents your site. And if you have any questions, you can always contact your data coordinator. We're working to refine this list so that we don't have any duplicative issues, but it's a work in progress. And if you have questions, again, ask your data coordinator. The fourth field is the location description field. Before I move to that, one last thing. If you're submitting well locations, most all wells are associated with the land location setting value. In-stream piezometers, you would select stream river, but most all other wells, you would select land as the valid value. I have been doing this through all of our trainings, and so I'm going to stop at this point and describe a little bit about the location template before we move too far along. You'll notice the color coding, and Chris mentioned earlier that these templates have a color coding value to them that corresponds with the help documents for these. In the location template, the yellow values represent fields that are required for all stations. We also have a blue color code option, which is required for well locations. We have a third color on here that's green, and that's representing the fields where you will enter your coordinate information. And we'll be discussing the green coordinate fields because we only ask that you submit one coordinate type per station, even though we have lots of options for you to fill that out. Also, the white fields or uncolored fields may have conditional requirements on them based on what you've entered in other fields in this table. So please be aware that the help documents will really guide you in what you need to be filling out based on how you filled out other sites. All right, location description is the 2,000 character description field we have for really getting down to what exactly your coordinate represents and where exactly did you collect samples. This is important information because anybody can use your site to distinguish your site from other people's data. It may be a point that falls right at a road crossing and you sampled upstream and somebody else sampled downstream. And you would want to distinguish that information and make that very clear in this field. The guidance I give is that think of guiding someone to your sampling location so that they could collect at that exact same site. And you have 2,000 characters, so hopefully that's awesome. This next field is the Ecology Facility Site ID. This can apply to individual locations within a study. Again, this is another field for assigning this information to discrete locations, whereas studies are also required to fill this out if they're pertaining to one facility site ID. Some studies will actually take samples from multiple facility sites, So we ask that each location be given their unique facility site ID at the location level. And this is where you would populate this field. There's another field that's coming at the end of this location template that is a flag field describing that your location represents the upgradient well at a facility site. And if you populate that with a yes value, you'll be required to provide us with that facility site ID. You can obtain that from an ISIS database link that Jenna showed you on the study form or through Ecology's website. The next field is a flag field for whether or not your location is a well. It's yes or no, Y or N. And just to reiterate what's in the help document, sampling locations established by direct push methods like geoprobes are not considered wells unless they are giving a permanent casing in EIM. So you would use no if no casing was applied to your direct push method station. The next 5 fields are address information. This is optional, but can be helpful. And the next 2 fields are the NHD Reach Code and Reach Measure, NHD Reach Measure fields. These are required by convention if your sampling site is a surface water monitoring site and it's represented on the NHD hydrography data set. NHD stands for National Hydrography Data Set. It's the national data set managed by the USGS, and the Department of Ecology is the Northwest region steward of that data set, and edits come through our agency. And we have adopted it, Washington State has adopted it as the state standard hydrography layer. And so if your station is on a surface water on this hydrography, we'd love to have that NHD Reach Code so that it can be applied, the data from your stations can be applied to this hydrography in a GIS. NHD Reach Codes are available for water bodies and streams, and water bodies can include lakes and Puget Sound and some large river areas, and they will apply to the entire water body in that case. They also apply to segments of stream channels, typically segments of streams between confluences on the map. As new streams are added to the NHD, it's our standard practice to not create new reach code IDs. So this should be a reach code that you do not have to update at all for your stations, because we won't be splitting up reach codes over time, to make that painfully clear. So NHD Reach Measure is only applicable if you're sampling stream locations. This Reach Measure is a linearly referenced value representing some percentage of distance along a map stream channel. So every segment that's given a reach code will be divided essentially into percentages, 0 being the downstream end and 100 being the upstream end. So this is going to be some value between 0 and 100. And we have a tool for acquiring this information from our online EIM map search application. And I will be showing that to you guys in a little bit. And we will now be jumping into the way to define your coordinates for your locations. Column N is where we left off. This is a required field, you can see, for all stations. And this field is titled Coordinate System. This is a valid value list field, and you have 3 options for defining what coordinate system you are about to submit coordinates for your station in. We have the valid value of lat-long for latitude and longitude coordinates, SPCS for state plane coordinate system, Washington State Plane, and also we can submit UTM coordinates for these stations. If you select lat-long, either the next 6 fields or columns U and V will apply to you. The next fields after the coordinate system are the latitude, degrees, minutes, seconds, broken out into their individual values, and longitude, degrees, minutes, seconds. So this is where you can enter this coordinate system type and coordinate type. U and V are the latitude decimal degrees and longitude decimal degrees. That's the latitude and longitude coordinate value that you collected for your station. You can note that the longitude value, you can either enter or omit the negative value, because all of Washington's valid coordinates are going to be negative for longitude in the system. So when it gets loaded, it'll be populated, but it will load into EIM with or without the minus sign. If you select state plane coordinates as your coordinate system value, you'll need to populate columns W, X, and Y, state plane coordinate, state plane X coordinate is the first field, and then your Y coordinate will go into a separate field, followed by a valid value for the state plane zone that you're submitting that coordinate to represent. And Washington State has 2 zones, north and south, and so we have values of N and S for this field. If you're submitting UTM coordinates, you'll fill out these last 3 fields. There's the UTM easting and UTM northing values split out, as well as a UTM zone designation, and this is going to be either a valid value of 10 or 11 for the 2 UTM zones in Washington State. The help documents have graphical representations of where these zones are, as well as the state plane zones in case you're not familiar with them. So again, you only have to submit one type of coordinate value. And when the locations are loaded into the EIM system, we normalize all coordinates together into our state standards of NHD 83 HARN, datum, and projected in state plane south coordinates as decimal degrees. So you can submit multiple ways, but they will be normalized once they get into the system so that everything's mapped correctly together. Column AC, AD, AE, and AF describe some of the metadata around the coordinate. Column AC is horizontal coordinates represent, and this is a valid value code field defining what those coordinates are representing on the ground. Commonly, these are discrete sampling points where data was collected, but you could represent by your coordinate point the centroid of a monitoring area, the center of a stream segment, including the riparian zone, or the start, middle, or end of a survey transect. This is an important field to look at in EIM if you're going to be submitting data for an existing location, because you might be submitting data to that coordinate point for a discrete monitoring location, but it may actually be representing currently the centroid of a larger area or transect. So an important point to review. The next field is horizontal datum. These are valid values that are standard datums, NAD 27, NAD 83, NAD 83 HARN, and WGS datums for projecting your coordinates onto. This is an important field to look at your GPS device and figure out what it's actually representing when it gives you a coordinate. The next field is horizontal coordinate accuracy. This is a valid value list of the best guess of the accuracy of what that coordinate represents as far as your sampling station. I know many consumer-grade GPS units will happily tell you that you're within 10 feet of that coordinate, and yet can drift within 300 feet around that coordinate throughout a sampling period. So be sure that you review your stations and make sure that your accuracy passes the last test, so to speak. Horizontal coordinate collection method is the last required field for locations, and this is just another code valid value field where you're defining how that coordinate was collected, whether it was a GIS or a GPS, and what type of GPS. Paper map is also an option here, and if you fill out paper map, you'll be required to fill out this next field, paper map scale, and this has a set of valid values as well. Again, we have a tool built into our online map search application for acquiring lat longs that I'll be showing you in a minute. And when you use that tool online, you can build a table that will assign the required fields that describe the metadata for those coordinates. But we'll get into that. The next fields are related to elevations. You'll see that they're color-coded blue, but you can submit an elevation for any location in EIM. The first field is describing what the elevation value you're about to represent represents. And your choices here are top of well casing, land surface, well measuring point, or what is the last one? At least forget it. Sediment surface. The next field, elevation, is where you would enter the numeral value, followed by the elevation units, and this is a valid value field. Just like the horizontal coordinates, we have fields for describing the elevation datum, accuracy, and collection method. Note that this is a non-option if you're submitting elevation data, because now we only, for elevation datum, we only accept the NAVD88 datum, so you only have one option here. So it's just a reminder that your elevation value has to be referenced to that datum. There are third-party pieces of software that you can download, like CoreCon, for doing elevation conversion, but we don't have any tools internal to the system for doing those conversions from elevation datum. The next field is the field that was renamed in this latest revision. This is the sediment elevation reference. This is, again, going to be required for sediment locations if you provide an elevation value. And these are local datums and things like mean sea level that sediment data may be referenced to. At this point, if your location in EIM is not a well, you are finished completing the template. Those are all of the fields that are covered for environmental sampling locations. The rest of the fields are for wells only. The first few are related to establishing water level measuring points for a well. The first field is the well water level measuring point, or TOC ID. And it's a very long name. I wish we could have shortened that up. But this is an ID field where you are going to establish a code value to represent a measuring point where water level data will be assigned to. This is either going to be TOC and a number, or MP and a number. Currently, you can only submit one measuring point for a location through this template, but we can store multiple measuring points in EIM. You just need to contact your data coordinator, and we can add those in. Say your stick-up gets run over it, and you need to establish a new measuring point for where water levels are associated. We can enter in another measuring point and give its height and definite description, and then data can be associated with that new ID. That's why we have a number value here. So this can be TOC 1, 2, 3, 4, as more measuring points are added on over time. The next field is a description field describing what exactly that measuring point or top of casing measuring point is for the well. And this is 2,000 characters now, so there's plenty of room to be as verbose as possible, which is necessary for me to talk a lot. The next fields are the measuring points height and units. And these are required if you submit your elevation for your well as land surface. We want to know what the height to that measuring point is so that we can actually calculate elevations for those water levels that you've submitted on the fly. And we also have you enter a start date for when water levels were taken at that site. Wells are an important thing to look for, possibly already existing in EIM, and you can also search for whether or not measuring points for water levels have been established for those well locations. And if you are reusing a location that's a well and you have a different measuring point for water levels, be sure that you contact your data coordinator to add that in for your study. The next fields in the template are related to describing wells, and most of the fields that we'll be covering are information that you can obtain from the well log for a given well. The first is the well tag ID, and this is the Ecology well tag ID, if it's available for the well. The next three fields are the well owner organization, well owner name, well owner last name, and well owner first name. And this is information that can be useful for identifying wells, but is not something that is presented to the public when it's submitted, and it's not searchable. It's It's only for internal use and storage for identifying unique wells. The next 4 fields are required for all wells. The first is groundwater location type, and this is where you would specify whether your well is a monitoring well or a domestic supply well. Currently, we have seep spring as an option for describing the groundwater type. We're still working out the business rules for seeps and springs for representing groundwater data, but you'll have to stay tuned for how we're having people enter that, I'm afraid. The next field is well completion depth, followed by well completion units, and a well completion type. And your options here are cased, open interval, uncased, open interval, cased, open-ended, or unknown. So hopefully you can fit your well construction into one of those types. If you choose one of the valid values that is open interval, you'll be required to fill out the next 3 fields, which are well open interval, upper depth, lower depth, and those units. The next field is well maximum casing diameter and its units. Again, this is the well casing, not any sort of outside supporting structure for the well that's often present to protect the wellhead. We also have a field for entering in the well casing material, the well construction end date, and the well construction method. We have a set of valid values, which you can see in your help documents. Currently, we don't have a way to represent multiple well construction types here, but we do have column BJ, which is the well construction comment. Here's another comment field where you can provide additional information about multiple constructions, if they were used in the well, and any other information that may be pertinent to describing what that well represents or how it was constructed. I find this is a useful place also for data submitters to provide a well log ID for a site, because now we have the ability in EIM to associate well logs to our EIM locations through the Water Resources Program database. And we'll cover how you get that information in search, but your data coordinator can enter that in for a site if you're sampling well. And we're almost done. The last 3 fields are flag fields. The first is titled, Is Well Up Gradient of a Facility Site? Really, this is trying to capture whether or not the well is the up gradient well at a facility site. So if it's designated as a facility site's up gradient well, please enter yes or Y in this field. And also be sure to fill out that facility site ID number so that we know which facility is the up gradient well at. The next column is aquifer test conducted, and this is a yes/no field for describing whether a formal aquifer test was conducted, not just a Baylor test that was conducted at the time of a well construction. And last is this well naturally flowing? And hopefully you know that for your site as well. And that completes the location template.